Coming up on 5 Minute News. Police and protesters clash in Black Lives Matter demonstrations across the US. North Korea declares emergency in first suspected COVID case. And Tropical Storm Hanna soaks South Texas amid virus crisis. It's Monday, July 27. I'm Anthony Davis. Protests continued in several US cities over the weekend, with demonstrators squaring off against federal agents outside a courthouse in Portland, Oregon, as Black Lives Matter demonstrations escalated in California and Virginia. A protest against police violence in Austin, Texas, turned deadly when a witness said the driver of a car that drove through a crowd of marchers opened fire on an armed demonstrator who approached the vehicle, and someone was shot and wounded in Aurora, Colorado, after a car drove through a protest there. The unrest Saturday and early Sunday stemmed from weeks of protests over racial injustice and the police treatment of people of color that flared up after the May 25th murder of George Floyd in Minneapolis. In Portland, thousands of people gathered on Saturday evening for another night of protests over George Floyd's killing and the presence of federal agents recently sent to the city by Donald Trump. Protesters breached a fence surrounding the city's federal courthouse building, where the agents were stationed. Federal officers sent explosives into a crowd of non-violent civilians, raising tensions and providing additional video fodder for Trump's campaign against the so-called mob. In the Texas capital of Austin, a protester was shot and killed on Saturday night after witnesses say he approached a car that had driven through a march against police violence. Protesters in Oakland, California, set fire to a courthouse and damaged a police station after a peaceful demonstration on Saturday evening turned to unrest. In Virginia's capital, Richmond, a dump truck was torched as several hundred protesters and police faced off on late Saturday evening during a demonstration of support for the protesters in Portland. Police declared it to be an unlawful assembly at around 11 p.m. and used what appeared to be tear gas to disperse the group. US President Donald Trump has repeatedly branded anti-racism protesters in the country as terrorists, and he's promised to surge his paramilitary-style units from Portland to other Democrat-run cities in coming weeks shows he is willing to employ the repressive tactics used by autocrats to vilify those who challenge them as an electoral ploy. He has so far refused to engage when asked about the social issues behind the protests. North Korean leader Kim Jong-un declared an emergency and lockdown in a border town after a person suspected of being infected with the novel coronavirus returned from South Korea after illegally crossing the border, state media said on Sunday. If confirmed, it would be the first case officially acknowledged by North Korean authorities. Kim convened an emergency meeting in response to what he called a critical situation in which the vicious virus could be said to have entered the country. A person who defected to South Korea 3 years ago returned across the fortified border that divides the two Koreas to the town of Kaesong this month, with symptoms of COVID-19, the disease caused by the virus, KCNA reported. KCNA did not say if the person had been tested, but said an uncertain result was made from several medical checkups of the secretion of that person's upper respiratory organ and blood, prompting officials to quarantine the person and investigate anyone he may have been in contact with. One analyst said the announcement was important, not only because North Korea was for the first time reporting a suspected coronavirus case, but also because it suggested it was appealing for help. North Korea is under economic pressure because of international sanctions over its nuclear program. KCNA did not elaborate on how the unidentified runaway had crossed one of the most heavily guarded borders, but said the incident was being investigated and the military unit responsible would face severe punishment. North Korea has received thousands of coronavirus testing kits from Russia and other countries and imposed strict border closures. A day after roaring ashore as a hurricane, Hanna lashed the Texas Gulf Coast on Sunday with high winds and drenching rains that destroyed boats, flooded streets, and knocked out power across a region already reeling from a surge in coronavirus cases. Downgraded to a tropical storm, Hanna passed over the US-Mexico border with winds near 50 miles an hour, the National Hurricane Center said. It unloaded more than 12 inches of rain on parts of South Texas and northeastern Mexico. Border communities whose healthcare systems were already strained by COVID-19 cases, with some patients being airlifted to larger cities, found themselves grappling with Hanna. A community building known as the Dome in the border town of Mercedes was set aside for evacuees who had tested positive for COVID-19 or were exposed to the virus. Across the region, shelters were also opened in hotels, schools and gyms. Governor Greg Abbott said on Sunday that the Federal Emergency Management Agency approved an emergency declaration that will provide federal aid. Meanwhile, in the Pacific Ocean, Hurricane Douglas has closed in on Hawaii over the weekend. You can subscribe to 5-Minute News on YouTube with your preferred podcast app. Ask your smart speaker or enable 5-Minute News as your Amazon Alexa flash briefing skill. Visit us online at 5minute.news. 5-Minute News is an independent production covering politics, inequality, health, and climate, delivering unbiased, verified, and truthful world news daily.